Alrighty. Okay, so for those of you who weren't here last week, we like to start with a little go around where everyone gets a chance to have their voice heard. We're going to keep it a little bit shorter than last week. So it's not going to be as extensive, but everyone's just going to say, I know it says your name in the corner of your Zoom screen, but it's still nice just to get a chance to hear everyone's voice in the class, to have a little bit of initial participation. So this week, our focus, our text of the week, hello, Faye. This week, our text of the week is the Torah, Torah. And I know that for some of you, you already have lots of thoughts about Torah, and you know a lot, and you've read a lot and all of that. And some of you might be like, Torah? I kind of have heard of that, but don't really know what it is. That's totally cool. What we're going to go around first is everyone is just going to say, my name is so-and-so, and Torah is blank. And that could be, you could say what genre of book you think Torah is. You could say what Torah is to you, but it has to be one clause of a sentence, no run-on sentences, no paragraphs. Just it could be Torah is, from Sinai, or it could be Torah is a book of laws, or it could be Torah is, any of those things. Just a quick what before we start looking at Torah, what for you is Torah? So, and I'm actually not going to go first this time, because if I went first, then it would give away a lot of class. So because we're going to be talking about what Torah is and why we read it and why it is so wonderful, and then I'm going to be sharing as part of that kind of how I view Torah. So for now, y'all just all know that I'm Rabbi Fried. And who would like to jump in with their name? And Corey's got her hand up. Go for it, Corey.
Of course I do. I know why you're laughing. I'm Corey, and I would say Torah is 1/3 of the Tanakh.
Great. So Torah is 1/3 of the Tanakh. Just so that folks know, Tanakh is an acronym: Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Torah, prophets, and writings, which are the 3 sections of the Tanakh. And so Corey's right on, Corey. It's 1/3 of that. All right, Elliot, go ahead. You're up next.
I'm Elliot Sadel. I consider that everything in the Torah is true, even if it's not fact.
Wonderful. Love it. All right, who's next? Oh, Faye, go, 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 go. You just muted yourself. You were already muted.
No, he did it. I'm Faye. Torah is a gift.
Wonderful. Faye said Torah is a gift. And Alan, because you're on screen with Faye, do you want to go too?
I'm forced to. Yes, of course. I would say Torah is the history of the Jewish people.
Wonderful. Torah is a history. Love it. All right, who's next? Jeff, and then Beth.
Yes. Torah is essential to Judaism.
Great. Torah is essential to Judaism. Welcome, Tarot. Just so you know, we're all going around and saying our names, and then just Torah is, and then one word or very, very short sentence of what we're coming in with about Torah. What is Torah as far as we know right now? So Beth, go ahead.
For me, Torah is from the Word of God.
Great. Torah is from the Word of God. That word "from" is interesting. That's doing a lot of work there, Beth. And we can talk about that more later. Go ahead, Shelby and Zach.
Torah is to be interpreted.
And I would say, I'm Zach.
And, I'm Shelby.
Oh, yep. And I would say Torah is a mystery because I've never read it and know nothing about it.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Charlie, do you go by Charlie or Charles when you're in present company?
Charlie. Yeah.
Charlie. All right.
My name's Charlie Lowy. Torah is 5 books of lessons.
5 books of lessons. Awesome. Lauren, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lauren, and Torah is a contract.
Ooh. I'm loving these answers. These are all really, really awesome. And I just also want to say, if someone took yours, you can say it also. It's not you have to come up with something new kind of a deal. Sean and Cheryl.
I'm Cheryl. I think Torah is relevant.
I'm Sean, and I think that Torah is
A roadmap.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I'm loving all these different interpretations of the question. It's really fun. Tarek, go ahead.
I am Tarot, and I think Torah is an access point to the secrets of the universe.
All right. Tarot is like ready for Zohar Day already here in our
Is today Zohar Day? Did I
No,
show
today is Torah Day. Zohar Day is down the road.
Okay, good. I was going to say that would be a little bit too precise of timing.
It would. All right. Who else is ready? Give me a wave. Go ahead, Nathan. And then
Nathan
Cindy.
Golden. I think Torah is the central foundation of Judaism.
Wonderful. Foundation. Go ahead, Cindy.
Torah is our life and a way of living.
Yeah. I like both of them. So that's interesting. It's both our life and a way of living. They're interesting. They're obviously connected, but also a little bit different. I love that. In the same way that when we read Torah, we tease apart wording, we also do that a little bit when we speak about Torah, right? Like when Beth said it is from the Word of God, or when Cindy says it's life and a way of living, that these are both things that just as we are very precise when we read Torah, we also glean really interesting things when we hear the way that people talk about Torah. Wonderful. Who hasn't had a chance to go yet? Beth, go for it.
So Torah is something I guess I learned bits and pieces when I was a child, and now hopefully we'll be reading it again with a more adult education and background and gain a better perspective of it.
Wonderful. And maybe not even better, just a different one. That Torah, just like any text, like the whole class is about texts, is going to be different when we read it at different points in our lives. That no time when we come to a text is it going to mean the exact same thing. And especially coming to a text as a child versus coming to it as an adult. So wonderful. All right. Who hasn't had a chance to go yet? Marta.
I'm Marta Silverneck, and Torah has been many times very confusing to me without an interpreter.
Wonderful. So Torah is confusing without some help, without some guidance, that it can be esoteric. It can be, difficult to access. Wonderful. Thank you. Harriet.
Harriet Frankel Firkins.
I believe you're the only Harriet this evening. Yes.
Well, that's all right. I'm just used to saying all three names. And I see Torah as milk and honey.
Nice. All right, Estella.
Oh, I was afraid you were going to ask. Well, I am learning about Torah.
So Torah is a source of learning?
Yes.
There we go. All right, wonderful. And then I'm not sure if it's both Eileen and Lewis or just Eileen, but I see y'all on there. Can you unmute and share with us? All right, we'll come back to the rows another time. Okay, so we are going to dive into Torah, and specifically, we are first going to dive into this question of what is Torah, and then we're going to kind of go from there. So you'll see how this goes, or we'll all see how this goes, I guess. Alrighty. So we are here. Oh, this is alrighty. So where better to start talking about the Torah than at the very beginning? Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Genesis, just some basic Torah things for folks, because we're not assuming that anyone knows anything. As was mentioned by a couple of people, the Torah is broken up into 5 books. The first book, known by its Greek name Genesis, which, generation, growth, beginning. And it starts with this word Bereshit. Which can be translated in a number of different ways. One of the things we talked about last week was that any translation is kind of an interpretation. So often translated as in the beginning. Here you'll see that it's translated as when God began, that, different interpreters are going to translate it in different ways. But this is the very beginning of the Torah, chapter 1, verse 1 of book 1 of the Torah. So would someone like to be our reader and read for us chapter 1, verse 1? Again, when I ask people to read, the expectation is that it's in English, so don't worry about Hebrew reading levels.
Sure,
I can.
I'll do it. Or go ahead.
You can go.
Okay. When God began to create heaven and earth.
Wonderful. When God began to create heaven and earth. It's a wonderful beginning, right? It's a great start to this book. It's rich. It could go anywhere. It starts at the beginning. But we have an issue here. We have Rashi comes along. Rashi is a commentator from France from the 11th century. He's known as one of the greatest commentators on the whole Bible as well as on the Talmud. He was very, very prolific. He read everything. He had comments about everything. And Rashi says, this isn't how the Torah should start. Rashi says, this doesn't make sense because this isn't what the Torah is. And we're going to read why.
So we can see that.
Yes, I know. Elliot, I promise. I was just introducing it. I'm going to scroll it up and then Elliot, you'll read it for us, okay?
Inani, I'm here now.
Oh, hey, Lewis. All right. So here, just need to make sure that you can see all of this. All right. Elliot, why don't you go ahead and read the Rashi on this?
Okay.
So Rashi is a commentator. So Rashi is commenting on this first verse.
Rabbi Isaac said the Torah, which is a law book of Israel, should have commenced with the verse Exodus 12:12. This month shall be unto you the first of months, which is the first commandment given to Israel. But what is the reason then that it commences with the account of creation? It was a thought expressed in the text in Psalm 111:6. God declared to God's people the strength of God's works, i.e., God gave an account of the works of creation in order that God might give them the heritage of the nations.
Okay, wonderful. So there's some stuff to unpack here. This is a little confusing. This was written in the 10th century. Let's figure out what's going on. Does anyone want to try to take a stab at what is Rashi saying here in your own words? Corey, go ahead. Sorry, I can't see everyone on one screen, so it can help.
I'm trying. I couldn't find the hand raised thing.
All
Sorry.
good. Go ahead. Tell us what Rashi's saying.
One is, can everybody mute unless you're talking? Because there's some people that are unmuted. There's lots of noise in the background. Sorry. Also, I would say that it's talking about like the law book of Israel. So I'm thinking like it's talking about like the commandments, the things that you're supposed to follow, to appreciate God and to thank God and to be one with God, basically.
Okay, great. So Rashi is saying the Torah is supposed to be a book of laws, that's essentially what he views Torah as. And so therefore it doesn't make sense for it to start with creation, because creation's not a law. Creation isn't a commandment. It's not a mitzvah. So Rashi's trying to answer the question, why are we starting with creation if creation's not a law? If we're supposed to be a law book, shouldn't we have started in Exodus, in the next book of the Torah, on whatever the citation is, and chapter, whatever, verse, whatever, when it says this is your first month, because that's the first law that is given to the people of Israel specifically. And if this is a law book meant for the people of Israel, shouldn't we start out with that first law? I think we have someone who's unmuting and we're getting some echo. One sec. All right. So that's Rashi's take. But then why, according to Rashi, does it begin with creation? And it gets a little weird because he's like quoting Psalms and it's a little all over the place. But essentially it's, go ahead, Tarek.
Sorry, I wanted you to finish your thought. I hit it seems to me that what he's saying is, Torah is a book of law, but it's got to be rooted in something. It can't be just a random set of instructions, we have to understand who's giving us this law and why it's so important to follow it. So then it makes sense to say it's coming from the creator himself.
Exactly, that there's this idea of heritage that comes with our law, that it's not simply a law code in which we write down what the laws are, that there needs to be some semblance of heritage, some explanation, some preamble, if you will. It's just like in our Constitution. Our Constitution doesn't start with law number 1. Our Constitution starts with a preamble, and even before the preamble to the Constitution, there was a Declaration of Independence. There were these statements of intent that led into our ability to have laws that we believe in because we are part of a founding idea. We are part of a founding, people that has ideas behind it. So in order that God might give them the heritage, that heritage will eventually include laws, and we're gonna talk about laws, but that it has this idea of heritage as well. So on the top, I want to talk for a second about kind of the structure of the Torah. I'm going to stop sharing for a second because some of this might be things that many of y'all already know, and for some of y'all it might be brand new information. But as we saw, the Torah starts Bereshit, in the beginning, that book of Genesis, which is also called Bereshit. And the book of Genesis is essentially the founding family drama of the Jewish people. It includes a lot of sibling rivalry. The younger sibling often gets the better of the older siblings. There's kind of a lot of turns where you would expect the older sibling to be the more powerful one and to get the blessings. And in fact, we have lots of instructions about making sure that the older sibling gets their proper due. But then there's a lot of subversiveness of the younger sibling over the older sibling throughout the book of Genesis. We learn about our forefathers and our foremothers. We learn about Joseph, his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and his story takes about the last third of the book of Genesis, which concludes with the Israelites, because at that point, there's, again, I should say, for the whole of the Torah, there's no such thing as Jews. Jews is not mentioned at all in the Torah. There are Israelites, or the children of Israel. Israel is the name that Jacob gets after wrestling with an angel in the book of Genesis, but there's no such thing yet as Jews. There's Israelites. It's a people, it's a family, it's an ethnicity that are bound together by contract with God. And that the beginning is that story of how does that contract come to be, God's choosing of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob, of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, and their progeny, and then they all go down to Egypt together. Then the Torah kind of yada, yada, yadas 400 years. Things go very badly. They become enslaved, and they're in slavery in Egypt for 400 years. And then the first half of the book of Exodus is them getting out, is the Moses story, Moses and Aaron floating down the Nile River, confronting Pharaoh, 10 plagues. If you've been to a Seder, this is very familiar to you. If you haven't, we'll do Seder this year. It'll be great. And you'll learn more about that story. And then we get in the middle of Exodus what many people believe is kind of the central event of the Torah, the revelation at Sinai, the giving of the 10 Commandments, and the direct contact between God and the whole Israelite people, and between God and Moses. And before we talk about it seriously, I have a humorous clip about it that I really like that comes from an Israeli television show called HaYehudim Ba'im, which means the Jews are coming. And it's an Israeli sketch comedy show that skewers everything. And I have just a clip that I wanted to play from it that I really love that kind of is about the 10 Commandments. Sorry, one sec. Just need to pull it up.
טוב, רבותיי, אלה הדיברות שאתם צריכים לקיים. שאלות?
כשאתה אומר לא תישא את שם אדוני לשווא, אז לא הרגע אמרת את השם שלו?
לא, אדוני זה לא השם שלו.
אז איך קוראים לו?
קוראים לו אדוני.
אז כן קוראים לו אדוני.
לא, זה לא השם שלו אדוני. השם שלו מתחיל ביוד ונגמר ביוספה. לא, נו.
יודה.
עזבו, לא חשוב. שאלה הבאה.
לא תחמוד אשת רעך. זה אומר שאסור אפילו לחשוב עליה?
נכון. אפילו אם היא ממש שווה? כן, גם אם היא ממש שווה. ואם אני מסתכל עליה וכל הזמן אומר לעצמי, אל תחשוב עליה, אל תחשוב עליה. זה נחשב שאני חושב עליה? אני לא יודע, אני אברר לך את זה. אבל תברר, כי אני לא רוצה ליפול פה על סתירה לוגית. עוד שאלות! זה בקשר לכבד את אביך ואת אמך. נו באמת. ומה אם נניח אבא שלי רצח מישהו תוך כדי שהוא חושב על אשתו השווה של השכן? צודק, אם זה המצב, אז אל תכבד. בסדר? עוד שאלות. לגבי הלא תרצח. מה לא ברור בלא תרצח? למה צריך להתווכח על כל דבר? לא תרצח, לא תרצח, מה לא ברור פה? זה כולל עמלקים? כי אתה ביקשת שנמחה את זכרם. עכשיו, כשאני מוחה זכר, אז אני עושה את זה בעזרת רצח. אז אני מפספסת פה משהו. צודקת, שימי את העמלקים בצד. לא תרצח, לא כולל עמלקים. ופלישתים. כן, וחיטים. ומורים. ויבוסים. וגרגסים. אבל זה לא מה שאמרתי. אבל אתה ביקשת מאיתנו שננקה את ארץ ישראל מכל ישועיה. אבל זה לא אומר שצריך ישר לרצוח אותם. אז מה נעשה איתם? נשלח אותם לשייט? רבותיי, בסדר, הבנתי, לא תרצח למעט פלישתים, עמלקים, גרגסים, יבוסים, אמורים וחיטים. ומצרים. מה מצרים? מה מצרים? את ראית פעם מצרים בארץ כנען? אתה רצחת פעם מצרי, מה? אז למה לך מותר ולנו לא? מה, אתה יותר טוב מאיתנו? מה זה? לא, הנה, תראו אותו, כן, מסתובב לו בעולם, רוצח איזה מצרי שבא לו, אבל לנו לא. לנו אסור, למה? כי הוא משה, והוא יכול לרצוח את מי שבא לו. לא, לרצוח! לא, לרצוח! מה לא ברור ולא? לרצוח! לא תרצח! פשוט לא! עוד שאלות? לא, לא. אנחנו ברשותך נלך לעבוד את אלוהינו. לחשוב עליה אם היא מתה זה לא נחשב, נכון?
All right. Oh, wait. Sorry. 1 sec. It's still playing somewhere.
الطريقة الصحيحة لغسل اليدين.
Go away.
يعد غسل اليدين إحدى أهم
Okay, there we go. All right. So that was a more amusing portrayal of what happened after Revelation. But I think so. There's two things that I want to point out here. One is it's okay to have fun with Torah. That's okay. That we can believe that Torah is important. We can believe that Torah is a roadmap for our lives. We can believe that Torah is vital, is life, and we can have fun with Torah. And that Torah doesn't explain everything, that there's lots of holes, that essentially what this skit is doing is, like we talked about last week, it's midrash. It's trying to fill in the holes. It's trying to imagine what it would have been like to have been the Israelites and received these instructions and not known exactly what to do with them. In actual revelation, the rabbis say that they're not really sure how much the people of Israel were even able to handle hearing the voice of God standing at Mount Sinai. There are some people who say God only got out the first word, I, Anochi. And then the people of Israel are like, okay, that's too much. We can't hear any more of God's voice. Moses, you go up and talk to them. There are other commentators who say even just the first aleph, the silent letter at the beginning of that word, that was enough. That they heard that, and just in that letter was all of Revelation, was that direct contact between this people and God, and that is what it meant to hear the word of God, the voice of God. And the people said, okay, that's enough, Moses, you go do the rest. But as someone said, as Beth said, that Torah comes from the voice of God, as someone else said that Torah is all true, even if it's not all fact, this idea of Torah, traditionally, historically, in Judaism has been that the entire Torah was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. That everything that we know about Torah was all told to Moses at that point of Revelation, about halfway through the book of Exodus. The rest of the book of Exodus is a construction manual, is how do you build a tabernacle in the wilderness, and then building of the tabernacle in the wilderness. That's what it is. Then you get book of Leviticus, lots of rules, lots of sacrifices, lots of do this, don't do that. Book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, travelogue through the desert. It's kind of, we went here, this wild thing happened, we went there, that wild thing happened. And then Deuteronomy, the whole last book of the Torah, is Moses's grand speech to the people, is a speech by Moses right before they're about to enter the land of Israel, because Moses doesn't get to go into the land of Israel. It's a whole separate story. But that's kind of how it ends up, this last speech that Moses gives right before they go into the land. So that's kind of the grand overview. What we're going to do now is we are going to do some Torah study. We are going to look at Torah and take it apart a little and put it back together and think about some questions. And we're going to do that in chavruta. We're going to do that in pairs, in partnership. And so I am going to put a link in the chat. Going to put a link in the chat that everyone should be able to access. And you are going to, there we go. And in a moment, you are going to open that up, and that'll be, you know, in your browser screen. And then you are going to have a chavruta. You're going to have a partner. I'm going to assign them randomly. You're going to be with your chavruta for about 10 minutes. So you can first introduce yourself. You can spend the first like 2 to 3 minutes like schmoozing a little bit. Might be someone you know already. You catch up. Might be someone you don't know. You say, hi, I'm, you know, so-and-so. Here's how I arrived at this class. Here's how I'm here. And then you will take some time to read the text. You're going to read them out loud to each other. You're not going to read them silently to yourselves and then talk about them. You're each one of you will read one text out loud to the other person. And then there's some questions. And you're going to look at these two texts that come from two different places in the Torah, and you're going to compare them. And you're going to look at how they're the same and how they're different and how they talk to each other. And then we are did someone just come in or go out? And then we are going to come back, and hopefully you will have been listening to your chavruta, because you are gonna share a little bit coming back into the main room about what y'all talked about, and then we'll talk a little bit at the end about my answer to what Torah is, and then we'll wrap up for the day. So that's kind of the rest of the plan. So I am going to create breakout rooms. How many people? So 9 or 8 breakout rooms, I think. How many are there? 18. So it would be 9, but not me and not Darren. Okay, great. So I am going to manually. All right. So 1 second. All right, I am just going to start putting folks into rooms. I just have to do it manually. It'll just take 1 second. Sorry. We're just going to do this alphabetically because that's the easiest way to do it. Alrighty, so I am going to open up your rooms. Please hit, join room. I will pop into each room for a second, just to see how you're doing. But again, we're gonna all be getting back together right at about 7:10. So take a couple of minutes to schmooze, then dive into your texts. So I am opening the rooms. You should all start disappearing. Excellent. Elliot, are you able to join your breakout room? Elliot? Elliot, are you able to join your breakout room? You're freezing up on me a little bit. There we go. Okay. Hi, Tarot.
Hi, Rabbi. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good, good. Nice to see that. I hear great things about your new post as rabbi.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah, we got here, and then a month later was high holidays. I've also had 7 funerals since I got here.
I know, it's terrible.
And now we just started today. They're finishing part of our basement and ripping up our kitchen. So it's just like a lot of things all happening all at once.
How are you finding Louisville?
It's a really, really cool place. It's
Good.
really, really
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah. We like it a lot. It's tough to like be here during COVID, because we can't do as much. But we've been able to get out. We like went to we've been to concerts on the waterfront, and we went to like one of the Belle of Louisville bluegrass nights, and like a couple of distillery things. Like we've been getting out and doing things. It's been
Okay,
it's been
good.
fun.
Yeah, it's a really fun town. I love Louisville.
How's New York life?
Things are good. Yeah, I don't know if you know, but my grandmother has stage 4 lung cancer.
Oh
So I've
no,
been
I didn't know.
traveling a lot. I've been in and out of Kentucky, but I've been to Louisville a couple of times, but just haven't been able to spend any significant amount of time there. But thank God she's doing really well. The chemo ended 3 weeks ago, and we had a meeting last week with the oncologist, and it had spread. It's metastasized, so she's not cancer free by any means. But the tumor in the lung is gone. So Baruch Hashem, we have another year or two with her. So
amazing. Where does she live?
In Bowling Green.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about 90 miles south of Louisville.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been flying in and out of Nashville a lot.
Yeah. I'm glad you've been able to have time to go and spend time with her.
Yeah, I'm coming. So now that she's like stable and set up at home and doing well, so I was coming for like 3 weeks at a time here, a month there, whatever. Now I'm coming 1 week a month, and I'll be there the third week of November, and I will definitely be in Louisville because I have a doctor's appointment. So I hope we can get together then.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. That's either right before the beginning of Hanukkah, so that'll be great.
I think it's right before. I think Hanukkah starts like right after Thanksgiving or on Thanksgiving,
Yes.
something like
Yeah,
that.
it starts right after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it's early this year. So it'll be the week before that.
So the week of Thanksgiving.
No, the week before Thanksgiving.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, so it'll be good. But anyway, thanks for not putting me with a chavrusa. I don't have the energy tonight.
Totally. I'm just gonna pop around to the chavruta.
Yeah, go ahead.
Alrighty. Oh, I think someone might be raising their hand. Oh no, that's just that you're not joined. Hey, y'all. Everyone else will come back over the course of the next 60 seconds.
That's optimistic.
Well, they have to. Their breakout rooms will close. They have no choice.
There you go.
Yeah.
I like breakout rooms. We do that all the time with like school stuff, or we used to when we did everything on Zoom.
Yeah. You gotta mix up the pedagogy.
Yeah.
I'd never done this ever before. That was too much.
It's a bit easier when you're at a computer, Lewis.
I spent the time in a room with Harriet Perkins. I deserve another chance.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I apologize. I know some of you had a little trouble accessing the sheet right away, but I hope that you had some productive conversations about these two different verses. One of them, if you read it in Hebrew, you might have recognized it. It's the third paragraph of the Shema, the third paragraph of the prayer that we say a couple times a day. So I'm just going to go ahead and mute some folks who have some background noise going on. And so I'd love to hear what the question that I like to ask when coming back from Chavruta is, what's one thing that you heard your Chavruta say? What's one thing you heard your study partner say that either you really loved, maybe something that you disagreed with but you thought was really interesting, just something notable, not that you brought up during your time studying, but that, and if you were in a group where there were a couple people on screen, it doesn't have to be the other screen, it can be someone who you were studying with, something that someone else said while you were studying with them. So think about that for a second. I'm going to give everyone 30 seconds just to think, and then we'll get started with some sharing. All right, Shelby, and then Charlie, or Zach. I don't know who wanted this.
I'll take it. So we were in Havruta with Sean, Cheryl, and Solomon. And I really found it interesting that Cheryl mentioned that in both of these passages, we are not like gatekeeping holiness. It's not saying only Jews can be holy. The first one obviously gives like a concrete, example of how to be holy. But we were talking about how the different interpretations of that, and that it's not specifically a Jewish thing. And yeah, we found that a really interesting topic of conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Charlie.
I was kind of going to say the same thing about the particular semantics of saying a holy people in the second text instead of the holy people. I thought that might mean that there are other groups of people that can be holy and other individuals.
Wonderful. So that close reading of the article, whether it's a or the, can tell us a lot. And that's how we read Torah. We look at those things, and we look in the Torah in a single letter, because in Hebrew, a single letter hey before a word changes it from a general to a definite article, from just a thing to the thing. And so that one letter, just like you said, can make all the difference. So wonderful. Thank you, Charlie. Anyone else hear something in their chavruta that they want to share? Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
Well, Cindy and I talked about how everybody's holiness can be different, mean different things to them. And Cindy said that she feels holy, like when she does her tradition of trying to do Havdalah at the end of Shabbat. And that's her holy tradition. I said my holy tradition is, having dinner with my family every Friday night. It's something that is holy to me. So everybody can have different things that mean holy. It doesn't have to be within the synagogue itself or praying. It can be within holy things of other things. Now, and that's necessarily say that in the text, but that's how we interpret it. So that was one thing. And then if I can just we read a little bit of the next part.
Mhm.
And the one thing at least that stood out to me is that you should be nice to everybody, no matter who they are. And it kind of goes along with holiness, like you are holy, like if you are a good person, which I think Judaism definitely encourages all the time. And one thing I like about being Jewish. So
Great. So you read that next part, that part in Leviticus that's known as the Holiness Code, that
yes,
says that you shall be holy for I am holy. And then it goes and lists a bunch of things, which most of which have to do with kind of the way we act between each other. Absolutely. Thank you. Sean and or Cheryl, I see your hand is raised. And or Solomon. Shmuel can also speak if you would like. You're still muted though. You're still muted.
I was just remembering that he likes to talk over us during these little groups. Zach pointed out that I guess in modern society, when you're not in a Jewish community necessarily, and you have things like anti-Semitism and other attitudes about Judaism, that it sort of elevates that being set apart and makes any kind of act of Judaism even more holy. And I thought that was a good comment. Important.
Yeah. And I'd love to build on that the word in Hebrew for holiness, kadosh or kedusha, comes from the root of the word to separate, to make things different, to be different, to make different. And it's fascinating that Cindy, you talked about Havdalah as something that you feel holy, which is a ceremony, but that's all about the separation of Shabbat from the rest of the week. That the whole idea of Havdalah is there's sacred time, there's holy time, and then there's regular time, and we separate, we make different those ideas. And that a lot of what holiness is about was and is about being separate and being different. And that, that what you're saying about in modern times, this idea of being separate, Jews have always been kind of separate in that other text you read, right? That it's, you were chosen not because you were many, not because you were everywhere, not because you were the hegemonic, power, but because you were small, because you or just both because of and despite the fact that you were a small and separate people. And that Kedusha, holiness, was one way that Jews remained separate, that they remained different. So I think that one of the really interesting things that's percolated here in this discussion is, even though people haven't been commenting directly on each other, there's been two things. There's been this percolation of holiness as a universal idea and holiness as a particular thing. And that's kind of at the core of this, that one of the things that these two different verses or collections of verses tease apart is what a rabbi named David Hartman, alav shalom, would call the holiness of doing versus the holiness of being. So what does it mean to just be holy, and what does it mean to do things that make you holy? And that the Torah seems to present both of those. So I'm going to say a couple of things that I think the Torah is, but one of the things that I think the Torah is even just as the Torah is from the Word of God, and just as everything in the Torah is true, it's also multivocal. It also says things that sometimes seem to contradict each other. It sometimes seems to be in conversation with itself as a text, and that's not a bad thing. Because just as Eliot said that everything is true even if it's not fact, the Torah is a book that can hold multiple truths and they can all be true. And now for some strict logicians, that can be really hard. That if you look at the Torah strictly from a logical or rational standpoint, it can be really hard. You say, wait, no, holiness is either something you do or something you simply are without having earned it. You can't be both. But in the Jewish mind, you can be. That you can have a multivocal text that teaches you different things and allows you to build. And that was one of the things I really wanted to talk about when I talked about Torah with y'all, was this idea in Jewish tradition that there doesn't have to be one right way of thinking or one right way of doing things, that multiple people can see holiness in different ways and can look to the Torah to learn what holiness is and can come out of it with different ideas. And to that point, we're now going to read a few modern rabbis and scholars and their ideas of what holiness are. That we're going to kind of close by fast forwarding, instead of staying in, medieval commentary, we're going to fast forward to modern commentary and see what some, modern Jewish scholars have to say about this. So I am going to reshare my screen. There we go. That didn't work. Sorry. Take 2. There we go. All right, so we're back in text in source sheet land. Okay, so, and we're going to read from people who describe themselves as different streams of Judaism, who work in the institutions of different streams. So we're going to read first from Dr. Raymond Scheindlin, who's a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is where I graduated from, so naturally the best theological seminary. But then we're also going to read from Professor Dahlia Marks, who is wonderful, who I learned with, who teaches at HUCJIR, which is the Reform Movement's rabbinical school in Israel and Jerusalem. And then we're going to read from Rabbi Daniel Hartman, who is David Hartman's son, who's an Orthodox rabbi. And we're going to read kind of each of them talking about holiness. And that's how we're going to kind of close up. So would someone volunteer to be Raymond Scheindlin for us? Go for it, Zach. You've always struck me as a Raymond.
I feel that. God's holiness is surely not merely a set of restrictions and requirements, but the power that created and sustains the universe, and that has the capacity to bring it crashing down. We cannot achieve the kind of power, of course, and woe betide the one who thinks he can. But insofar as it is compatible with our powers as human beings and the capacity of social institutions to tolerate it, we are to emulate this force by living actively, engaging positively, and intensively in whatever we do, however we live, and whatever choices we make.
So this is a feeling of holiness that echoes some of what I heard some of you saying in your chavrutas, this idea that emulating God is a part of what holiness is, and emulating God with the knowledge that we can never be God, that God's holiness is something totally, again, separate, different, a thing that part of what makes God holy is that God is not human, that's part of God's holiness, is that God is separate and different and sacred, but the way that we can imbue our lives with holiness is trying to emulate God as best we can. Wonderful. So now we are going to read from Professor Dahlia Marks. So does anyone want to be Dahlia for us? Go for it, Corey. Or did you have a comment?
No.
Great.
I can read. Okay. We cannot separate decent relations between humans from the commandments between a person and his or her maker. Harming or insulting a person is the same as harming or insulting the image of God in that person. Therefore, it is harming and insulting to God. Embezzling public money is not different from embezzling that which is holy to God. The reason to be holy is because I, the eternal God, am holy. The holiness of God requires that we lead a holy life. The commandments that explain the requirement to be holy repeat some of the directives of the 10 Commandments. For example, to honor parents, keep Sabbath, and abstain from idol worship. Some have considered this repetition a reflection of problems in the editing of the Torah, but in my opinion, there is deep meaning in it. The 10 Commandments are comprised of do's and don'ts, but Parshat Kedoshim, holy Parshat.
That's the portion whose title is Kedoshim.
Oh, okay, sorry. Tells us why we should keep the commandments and what we should look toward when we keep a mitzvah. We have to keep it so our lives will be holier. This is the purpose we should aim toward when we keep the mitzvot.
Wonderful. So I just want to define mitzvah really quickly because that word comes up a lot here. Mitzvah means commandment. Now, in modern Jewish colloquialism or slang, it's just come to mean good thing. You do a mitzvah is just doing a good thing. But what it actually means is commandment. There's an obligation to do mitzvot. We are commanded to do mitzvot. And what Dahlia Marks here is saying is that the reason that holiness is tied in with do's and don'ts, with commandments, is that the commandments, the laws are actually there so that our lives will be holier. That actually the structure of mitzvot, the structure of commandedness and commandments, is what can imbue our lives with holiness. And that when we talked at the beginning about the Torah being a law book, one of the things that I would say the Torah is that it is a guidebook to being holy. It is a guidebook to being holy in that it is full of mitzvot, and that when we keep these mitzvot, when we keep these commandments, so that can be when we do good mitzvahs, when we like just do a nice thing, when we use it colloquially, but all the more so when we keep the commandments as given. That's what it means to imbue our lives with holiness. I see a bunch of hands. I want to just read this last quote, and then I want to come back and let folks have some closing remarks. So I am going to ask if anyone who has their hand raised already just wants to unmute. Tarot, can you just go ahead and read Rabbi Hartman, and then we'll come back, and if you and Elliot and Corey have additional things, I want to hear what those are also.
In the Torah, the covenant of becoming comes long after the covenant of being, which is represented by the story of Abraham and occurs many centuries before the divine revelation at Sinai. Because of Abraham's test, we are accepted and loved by God before Torah, before we believed, before we did, before we kept kosher or Shabbat or anything. To be a Jew is to be challenged to become holy/worthy of the covenant, but to know that you're loved unconditionally. To be a Jew is to be challenged to become, but to know that you're loved unconditionally. The sequence is crucial. You only come to the covenant of becoming if you have a strong foundation in the covenant of the beginning.
Yeah, of being. So Rabbi Daniel Hartman from, again, he's an Orthodox rabbi who teaches at the Shalom Hartman Institute, or runs the Shalom Hartman Institute, which is a pluralist institute in Israel, is saying there's two different pieces of holiness here. There is the holiness of being, that there's something about being a Jew, that you are holy simply by being a part of this covenant. And since we've expanded what Jew means beyond Israelite, that means for anyone who is either born Jewish or joined the Jewish faith, that there is an unconditional love there, that there's an unconditional holiness. And that unconditional holiness challenges you to become even more holy, that it challenges you to build on that and to be worthy of that covenant all the more so. So those are our three different reflections on holiness from three different folks. I'm now going to call on the three folks who have their hands raised. I know that it's 7:30, so I understand if folks have to leave, but if people can give 2 to 3, maybe 5 more minutes, I just want to allow a little bit of space for people to share back and reflect on this. So in the order of people whose hands I saw Elliot's, and then Tarot's, and then Corey's. So Elliot. You're muted, Elliot.
That better?
Yeah.
A couple of things. One is I have to disagree with Rashi that the Torah is a law book. It's a book that contains laws. That's different from being a law book. The other is in the part we just read by that Reform rabbi. Mm-hmm. She said that insulting a person is like insulting God. I think there's a comment in the Talmud, I don't remember where, that one who respects others is like one who respects God. Mm-hmm. So just kind of flipping it around.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Tarot.
So while we were talking about holiness and Kedusha, a question popped up. And then interestingly, in that third reading, it clarified a little bit, but I'm curious, can we just stipulate what is holiness? What is Kedusha? How is that defined?
Yeah, so it's a great question. That's one of the reasons I asked the question of like, what for you is holiness, is that I don't think there is one definition of holiness. I think that holiness, we have lots of different synonyms for it in English. We have holiness, sacredness. I would add to that separate, different, that it is perhaps elevated. But there, I don't have a good definition of holiness. I think it's one of those things that's almost, you know it when you see it kind of a thing. But I think that we sort of define it around how do you get there? That if you get to holiness by doing mitzvot, if doing mitzvot brings more holiness into your life, then holiness is defined as the thing that comes into your life when you do mitzvot. That it's almost one of those things that ends up getting defined in the negative because it's so hard, or not even the negative, but like it gets defined around it because it's so hard to put an exact pin in it. But right, each of those definitions, I'll just say really quickly, each of those definitions could offer you a way to define holiness, but it might not resonate with someone else. So sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I liked the aside that Rabbi Solomon included when he wrote holiness and then / worthy of the covenant.
That was my word. It was in what he had been writing, but it was my worthy of the covenant was my words. So
Oh, well, then I like it even more.
but yeah, but that's part of how Rabbi Hartman talks about it, is this idea of becoming worthy of the covenant is one of the ways of looking at holiness.
Huh. It's great.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Corey, and then Jeff, I do see your hand up, so I'm going to go to you after Corey.
Yeah. Okay. Two things. One is there are a lot of mitzvot, and you don't necessarily need to do all of them at once. I think that's an interesting point. Like, even though they talk about the 10 commandments, it's not just the 10 commandments that are mitzvot, right?
Yeah.
Not me if I'm wrong, but 613.
613, exactly.
Yeah. So you can't do all of those at once. Like, you just can't. At least I don't think I think it'd be impossible if somebody did it. Good for you. And anyway. And also I just think the word covenant, like we kept talking about that, Cindy and I too, about that it's a promise, kind of a promise between God and us, and a promise between us and God. I'm sorry, that's my oven going off.
Absolutely. So yeah, that idea that the covenant is two directional, that we have a role to play in that and God has a role to play in that. Absolutely. And then yes, there's 613 commandments. A lot of them have to do with sacrificing animals. We clearly don't do those anymore. And right, I'm not coming here to say you have to do all the commandments and that's the only way to be holy. But I do personally, like in my personal theology, I believe that my performance of mitzvot, my performance of commandments adds holiness to my life and to the world. And that's a part of why I do that. And I do them partly out of a sense of obligation, that I'm obligated in commandments, in these mitzvot. But different people will approach it in different ways. But I'm not in any way saying that if you do fewer commandments, then you're less holy. That's not the message that I'm trying to share here. So Jeff.
Yeah, I was immediately struck, like Elliot was, I think, in sort of disagreeing with the middle reading, the Reform reading. It's kind of the softer side of Judaism. It's good enough if you're just a good person. I'd rather agree with the last reading. I think to be a good person, to be a good Jewish person, you have to have some skin in the game. You have to follow something or do something, not just be born of a Jewish mother.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting reading of Dahlia Marks. I think she was like being actually more emphasizing of the need to do mitzvot than a lot of other Reform writers would do. So it's an interesting reading of her, but I hear you and I appreciate your sharing. All right, Charlie's going to be our last word, and then we really do need to close because it's 7:35 and I know folks have other things to do. So Charlie, go ahead.
All right. So I know you've stressed kind of the subjectivity of some of these things and how you personally interpret them in holiness. Do you think that what do you think the like objective fundamental basis of Judaism is that is not really that up for debate?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk about that's a great question, first of all. And I think about, I think I'm gonna leave you with something that's not gonna totally fulfill you, but you'll keep coming to the class and we'll keep talking about it. I'm gonna say that the fundamental basis for Judaism objectively is the Torah, which takes us all the way full circle to my answer from the very beginning. So Charlie, we can talk about more about what that means, what parts of the Torah, how we look at the Torah. But I think that the Torah, and that when the Torah comes into our hands and we interpret it, that we're all working off of that same fundamental, that the Torah as we know it, we found the same scrolls with the exact same words that are 3,000 years old, that it fundamentally has not changed, it objectively has not changed in 3,000 years. It is deeply ingrained as an objective part of our system, but that is the way that we come to it today might be different than the way that they came to it 3,000 years ago. So thank y'all very much for coming.
Rabbi,
again. I'm sorry we ran a little bit over.
Rabbi, we have the minions. Do we say Kaddish to Rabbanan?
Sure. We can conclude with a Kaddish de Rabbanan, which is a Kaddish that is said after the study of Torah. So I invite anyone who is able to rise, and I have a siddur here.
But you have the daily siddur, it's on page 13.
All right, there you go. It's on page 13. East is some direction. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah. Balma divra kirute v'amlich malchute b'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye dechol beit Yisrael ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehe shmei rabba mevorach leolam molmei almaya. Yitbarach v'ishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalel v'yitalal shemed kudesha berichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechamata da'amiran ba'alma v'imru amen. Al Yisrael ve'al Rabbanan ve'al Talmidehon ve'al kol Talmidei Talmidehon ve'al kol man daskin bo'oraita di v'atra haden v'di v'chol atar v'atar yehe lahon u'lachon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin u'mezona revicha u'forkana min kadama v'hon di v'ishmaya v'imru amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim tovim alenu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu b'rachamav yaseh shalom, alenu v'al kol Yisrael. Amen. Alrighty, I will see y'all next week. I encourage you, if you love learning text, to also come tomorrow night for Ariane's Midrash class. Same link, same time. But it's really, really great learning with all of you. Thank you for being here. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Is
you,
it the
Rabbi.
same time or is it 6 o'clock?
Also at 6:30. Also at 6:30.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.